Hello and welcome to In the Zone, Millersville's only student-run sports show. I'm Scott Davies, and today we got a lot to talk about, including hockey playoffs. And now we're going to bring in our hockey expert, Jordan Coons. Jordan, we're going to first talk about the hometown Flyers. Now, what do they need to do coming in here to the playoffs to remain the Stanley Cup favorites, possibly in the East? And what do they have to do to switch things up?
When it comes down to it, the Flyers have struggled down the stretch, and they really need an attitude change, and that came in the last game of the season. Of course, they won against the Islanders by a score of 7-4, and the Flyers did not get great goaltending out of that game. Sergei Bobrovsky gave up 3 goals on 8 shots, and he is projected to be the playoff starter this year. So the Flyers just need a complete discipline change. They need to get their butts in gear because things are not looking good for the Flyers. They're coming in against the Buffalo Sabres. They lost their conference championship to the Washington Capitals, we'll get to in a bit. But the Flyers just really need to get in gear, and this is the time to do it now because really, it's do or die, and the Flyers did get to the Stanley Cup Finals last year, and that's their goal. That's their motto this year. It's either get to the Stanley Cup Finals or this year was a complete waste of time.
Now, Jordan, there's some big question marks here about the goaltenders. They got Bobrovsky or Leighton. Now, who do you expect to be the starter there?
Well, Sergei Bobrovsky has been given the vote of confidence from Coach Peter Laviolette. Michael Leighton was part of a risky move by bringing him up on re-entry waivers. He was sent down earlier this year to a back injury, and he didn't get his job back. Brian Boucher was playing wonderful at the time, and it was looking like those two, Sergei Bobrovsky and Brian Boucher, were going to be the playoff tandem going forward. But now Michael Leighton thrown into the mix. Maybe he's your third option, maybe he's your second option. But Peter Laviolette says that Sergei Bobrovsky, even with his substandard efforts lately, especially against the Islanders, he is the playoff starter, and he will remain the playoff starter unless something goes completely wrong against the Sabres. So Bobrovsky's got to be the guy on this one.
Now let's switch it over now to the Western Conference with the Anaheim Ducks. Now they've been ripping through the Western Conference behind goalie Ray Emery. Now Ray Emery has a little bit of a hip problem. Do you think that Emery can carry the Anaheim Ducks into the playoffs?
Well, Ray Emery's coming back from a potentially career-ending injury called a vascular necrosis. He was, in a normal person, they would not have a hip or they would not be able to walk, and he's lucky to be even playing. He has had some hip injury now moving forward. It has flared up a little bit, so Dan Ellis, who was the acquisition earlier, is going to come in for the Ducks and take over on goaltending. But if Ray Emery comes back, the Ducks have a playoff-tested goaltender they can go to, and they've been extremely hot lately. They're moving in against the Nashville Predators in round 1, and I see there's no way that the Ducks can lose this first round.
Now, one more question about the Anaheim Ducks. Do you think they're too top-loaded with Corey Perry?
Yes, and Perry took over the scoring race with 50 goals. He's the only 50-goal scorer in the NHL. They are top-loaded with Teemu Selanne, Ryan Getzlaf, Bobby Ryan, as well as Corey Perry, who is by far easily the Hart Trophy winner for MVP of the league. So I think they are a little top-heavy, but when it comes down to it, sometimes that's not a bad thing, especially when you have reliable goal scoring from a player such as Corey Perry. Been tearing it up recently. We'll see if he can keep it moving forward in a tighter checking playoffs.
Fair enough. Well, let's send it back over now to the Eastern Conference, where the Washington Capitals, number 7's been rather unlucky for them. The past 3 years, the Capitals have lost in 7-game series. Do you think that they have enough talent this year to push them into the Eastern Conference Finals?
Towards the middle of the year, Bruce Boudreau's job was in question because of the new defensive style that he had the Capitals playing through. And they went through a monumental losing streak during the HBO special that we saw exactly what was going on in that room, and it wasn't looking good. But now the Capitals have responded, and they play a better defensive structure. Alex Ovechkin did not have a good goal-producing year, but he was better on the defensive side of the puck. A lot of these players are more committed to defense now as opposed to charging only on offense. So I have a feeling with their first-round matchup against the New York Rangers, they now have a better defensive structure, and I have a feeling this will be the first non-7-game series that will work in Bruce Boudreau's tenure as the coach of the Washington Capitals.
Now, the Capitals can play all the defense they want, but will the goaltending hold up with the Capitals?
And that's an interesting question because all 3 of their netminders are young guys that they could go to. They could go to Michael Neuvert. They could go to Braden Holtby. They have so many options on goal because they're all so good. But when it comes down to it, it's experience that wins in the playoffs. And I have a feeling Neuvert, along with Varlamov and Holtby, are young, talented goaltenders. But I don't think that's enough per se to get them past the conference finals. I have a feeling experience may win out in that regard. But the Caps will get past the first round this year. I have no question in my mind.
Okay, well, how about the Pittsburgh Penguins and Sidney Crosby? Crosby is returning from a concussion, but do you think that the Penguins are in position to play him in the first round? Do you think that it would be good for them to play him to try to advance in the next round? Do you think they should really be thinking for the long term here?
They really should, and you're right, Scott. The executives of the Pittsburgh Penguins say that they don't want to play Crosby in the first round, and that is a brilliant move by GM Ray Shero. You don't want to risk your future that you have in Sidney Crosby just to make one run of the playoffs, even without Evgeny Malkin. This is not going to be a good move for the Penguins. Crosby has not been even cleared for contact practice. He just participates in game day skates. He's not prepared. He hasn't played a game since January the 8th. That's a long time ago, and players need to get their feet under them. If you've got Crosby coming back, sure, he's a world-class talent, but he's going to take time to get back into that mode. And with a tighter checking playoffs, one's intensity is everything. You can't have Crosby come back and risk further injury. So it's a great move by the Penguins management to keep him out. And I have a feeling the Penguins won't be either past the first or second round as hot as they've been. It's just not enough without Crosby and Malkin to risk the future.
And then how about Vancouver? Now, obviously, they're the clear-cut favorite here to win the Stanley Cups, but I mean, as of late, they've had a little bit of injury problems, especially going in the postseason here. Do you think that the injuries will kind of hold the Canucks back from what they need to do to win the West?
I have a feeling it'll hold them back a little bit. They've lost a couple of role players, so to speak. They've lost Manny Malhotra to an eye injury that may end his career. They've lost defenseman Dan Hamhuis to a concussion that was suffered a couple weeks ago, and it was 2 concussions in a month now that have left him out of the lineup. When it comes to goaltending, we all know that Roberto Luongo is one of the world-class goaltenders of the NHL, but when it comes to the playoffs, he's not exactly prime caliber goaltending in the playoffs, especially when it comes to playing the Chicago Blackhawks. And who else do the Vancouver Canucks play in these Stanley Cup Finals than the Chicago Blackhawks? Last year, it was a 6-game series. Roberto Luongo looked small, but one thing that the Vancouver Canucks can look forward to in the playoffs is that the villain of that series, Dustin Byfuglien, will not be dressing for the Blackhawks because he was he signed with the Atlanta Thrashers. So it's one of those things that the Vancouver Canucks have a lot of injuries, but the Chicago Blackhawks are not what they used to be, and I think that will work in their favor moving forward.
All right, gentlemen, one last real quick question. I'm going to put you on the spot here. Who do you think is going to win out of the East, out of the West? And then give me a finals prediction.
I have a feeling it will come down to Vancouver Canucks and the Philadelphia Flyers, and I'm sad for myself for saying this, but Vancouver Canucks will take that series in 7 games. They are a deep, stacked team with MVP caliber players like Daniel Henrik Sedin, Ryan Kessler. They've got great goaltending in Roberto Luongo. So they just have a stacked team, and they've been in the playoffs a couple times, so they know what it takes to win. So I think the Vancouver Canucks will be taking the Stanley Cup Finals, as regrettably as I have to say that.
All right, well, thank you, Jordan. As always, a pleasure. I appreciate your time on the show. Coming up next on In the Zone, we're going to bring in Andrew Mayers. We're going to break down the National League, and then after that, we're going to bring in Mason Perricone. We're going to break down the American League for the upcoming baseball season. Stay tuned, because we're in the zone.